Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We're back with another game preview here. Big East matchup, Villanova at UConn on Saturday at 12:30. Big one here for Villanova, who lost last weekend to St. John's. I think still sort of searching for a marquee Big East win, right? I mean, they lost to Creighton and St. John's, both at home. UConn, as we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, like yes, they're number 2 in the country, but they've sort of limped their way to their last 4 wins. Right, their execution hasn't been quite the same. Overtime win over Providence, 12-point win over DePaul, 5-point win over Seton Hall, and then just a 2-point win over Georgetown last Saturday. So full week prep here for UConn. Dan Hurley in the news this week was talking about how he just hasn't really prepared this team very well or valued ball security enough with this team. And it's kind of shown, right? It's why I think some of these teams are able to hang around. But Cody, I guess we'll start with Villanova. What does Villanova need to do here to pick up a marquee Big East win on the road?
Yeah, I would say both teams have kind of stumbled a little bit compared to like where their rating is at. I mean, that game against Georgetown for Villanova was not really a 15-point win. I mean, that game was tight. I think they were losing it for a little bit, like down early in the second half, if I'm not mistaken, before being able to break away. Like middle of the second half is where they kind of made their run, but both teams have kind of stumbled, like regressed a bit, particularly Villanova on the defensive end. Like we kind of figured like the personnel wasn't going to be able to maintain like an elite level defense. Like we put a lot of trust in Kevin Willard to be able to find ways, but I think it's right now it's turning into a little bit more of a personnel issue for this defense. And I think that's going to be the side of the ball that determines this game for Villanova, is finding ways to generate stops against a really, really good half court offense. And I think it does start with disrupting them and getting them out of their rhythm. Just don't let them get into their offensive sets easily. And, Kevin Willard's a guy that will switch defenses. He'll switch from man to zone. He'll press 94 feet. He'll play token pressure. Like he'll do pretty much anything that, a coach has tried before, and he'll do it. He'll try every defense throughout an entire game just to kind of throw you out of your rhythm. The zone defense has actually been pretty good. I do think they've been a bit lucky with their zone defense. I think teams are only shooting 25% from 3 against their zone, which I don't really think is all that sustainable. So, because their man defense in league play has not been very good. They're in like the 37th percentile and with their man defense, like that's across the entire country. So they definitely need to get better on that side. But I think disrupting them, switching defenses is kind of the way to go. Like Nova presses at a 91st percentile clip, so I think they could steal a few possessions that way. But at the end of the day, I do trust Willard to maintain like a solid defense. It's just a matter of this personnel stepping up. I'm not sure they have the rim protection really in this game, like as much as Duke Brennan does for this defense. He's not like a high flying shot blocker, and I do think guys like Taurus Reed and Eric Riva can have some success throughout this game. So defensively, it's going to be a real test for them. On the offensive side, I think it kind of just comes down to their dribble creation. I think mainly generating success in pick and roll. Like UConn's not like the greatest pick and roll defense out there. Like they've been one of the best defenses in the country, but I don't think pick and roll coverage has been like their main strong suit. So I think there's a potential avenue for, the Acaden Lewis and Duke Brennan 2-man game. Like Lewis has impressed me quite a bit. Like outside of his shooting, I think he's been rock solid all year. He's way ahead of schedule. And we coming into the season, we kind of had concerns about, a 4-star freshman leading the way for like a marquee program or a program that has like a lot of great history of winning. And like, we weren't 100% sure if he was going to be able to carry the load for Villanova standards. And I think he's actually done a pretty good job. And he's surrounded by solid shooters. So Lewis being able to create consistent advantages, it's going to be tough. He's probably going to be matched up with Silas Demery, who's one of the best point of attack defenders in the country for a point guard. So he's going to have his hands full in this game, but the more advantages he can create for these shooters, I think the better Like Nova also, like, they have a high isolation rate, and they're playing against a UConn defense that forces isolation at an extremely high clip. They don't like to be forced into rotation at all. They trust their one-on-one defenders on the wings and at the guard spot, particularly with a guy like Silas Demery. So, but Villanova's been a pretty good isolation offense. So being able to, even generate free throw attempts, off the bounce, getting to the rim, like UConn will foul, but the dribble creators of Lewis, like even Lindsay and Devin Askew, who's been, I think, better than we expected. He hasn't been phenomenal, but he's been okay. But I think he's another guy that I think there's potential avenues for success. Then just the last, like, overarching thing for this game is just limit possessions, and I think that's going to give you a better chance against an elite team. I think both sides don't really like to get up and down, and the less possessions there are in a game, I think the better chance the underdog has to win it. So I think, even getting this game down to the high 50s in possession count, like low 60s, I think gives them a real chance. And it really comes down to, more shot variance at that point in time. And I think Villanova is, rock solid enough on both ends of the floor to stay competitive if it's a low possession game. And no, I think even the late game pressure, I think, could bother UConn a little bit too. So if they're down 5 or 6, kind of look out for Villanova's, end of game pressure to give them some issues, similar to what like Seton Hall did. Like Seton Hall's late game pressure, I've talked about it a few times, is like the best, like one of the best I've ever seen. I think outside of like Houston's late game pressure, like particularly in that Final Four game last year against Duke, it was just unbelievable. But I think Seton Hall can do similar things, and Villanova can as well. So look out for that late in the game for them to potentially, steal one in the final minutes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, like, I guess just jumping into the UConn side of things, like that was main note, and I kind of alluded to it in the intro a little bit. Dan Hurley acknowledging ball security issues, the statistics acknowledging ball security issues. Right, they're sitting at 143rd in turnover rate. So low possession game if it's kept there, along with UConn's just carelessness with the basketball, I think could spell some trouble potentially. Right, this Villanova defense does turn teams over at a fairly high clip. They're inside the top 80 in the country in turnover rate defense. So I think that could set up for some trouble if, like you said, if it is close late, because Villanova has that ability to do so, and we've seen it time and time again with this UConn team this year. When teams are either trying to crawl back into games or it's tight late, they have the ability to sort of crumble just giving the ball away. So that's going to be really key for UConn on the offensive end. I think, of course, being at home helps that a little bit. You don't have the pressure of the Seton Hall fans on top of you, or just the energy of someone else's building. But then also on the offensive end, I think, like you mentioned, putting pressure on the rim, this Villanova front court just doesn't really have any real rim protection. Like you said, Duke Brennan, 2.2% block rate, just not really his game on the defensive end. So I think a guy like Tarish Reed could be in store for a rather big day, with his physicality, his size, his ability to kind of just bully you in the paint. I think that could be a big key to a UConn win in this game. As well as you mentioned, Eric Ryba, he's been a very pleasant surprise, I would say, as ready as he's been right away, having to step in at times when Tarish Reed's out of the lineup. So I think UConn has the edge on the interior without a doubt. I think they can generate some second chance opportunities in this matchup as well against the Villanova defense that doesn't really rebound the ball all that well. And UConn is inside the top 70 in offensive rebound rate. With Tarish Reed sort of leading the way, Ryba's right there as well with an almost 10% offensive rebound rate himself. So I think they can generate, some easy ones on the offensive glass, which could ultimately lead to kick out threes to some of these shooters. Like Alex Caravan shot it fantastic this season, 42%. Braylon Mullins, of course, has been really good. One of these games, solo ball is going to make shots, I think, right? UConn fans, I'm still holding out hope for him, right? He's 18 games in, he's shooting it at 27.5%. And last year, what did he shoot at 41% from three on almost 7 attempts a game? So, like, I would like to think that eventually he's going to find his footing, but it's been a pretty large sample size at this point, almost 20 games with still not much luck. So, we'll see if he can generate some open ones in this matchup. But I think those are the keys on the offensive end, and then on the defensive end, I think it's really just controlling the basketball. You remember earlier in the season, was it Villanova when they played BYU to open up the season, and everybody kind of thought that game was going to be not a great game. BYU was going to sort of blow them out, but I think it was some of the dribble creation that led to pitch out threes for a Villanova team that has shown the ability to knock the three down at a pretty high clip. I know they had a game where they had 24 threes, if I remember right, something like 21 or 20, somewhere in that range. I forget the exact number now. But I think if you can limit like Acaden Lewis getting downhill, who's really their sole sort of creator, right? He's the only one averaging over 2.1 assists. Like Bryce Lindsey that averages 2.1. Everyone else is below, 1.8. So, if you can cut off sort of the snake, which I think UConn has a great guy to do so, like you said, in Silas Demery, then they're going to be in a great spot, because I think this is a Villanova offense, particularly on the road, that if you're forcing them into like late shot clock, tough twos, tough threes, contested shots, like I don't think it sets up overly well for them to pick up a victory here, especially, where I don't know how well they'll really be able to generate second chance opportunities. I'm not like their numbers show, they're 51st in offensive rebound rate. This UConn defensive rebounding attack is just inside the top 100, but I think, like Taurus Reed, he's going to hold down the defensive glass, I think, for this UConn team in this matchup. So if they're forcing, if they're cutting off dribble penetration, forcing them into tough ones late in shot clock, I certainly trust UConn to clean up possessions and get out and go execute their stuff in the offensive end. So, I think that's where UConn can really have some success if Acaden Lewis is able to get downhill and spray out to shooters or get to the rim. I think then it spells a little bit more trouble. But we'll sort of see what happens, how that develops. I think UConn has avenues to certainly take that away. But in terms of game pick here, Cody, I know this spread's projected at like a 10-point spread or so for UConn. Who do you like to win this game?
Yeah, a blowout would surprise me. I think the possession count's going to be a little bit too low for that to happen. I think Villanova is competent enough on both sides of the ball, but I do have some concerns about what their man-to-man defenses look like, and I think UConn's half-court execution can ultimately win them this game at home. Yeah, like I said, I think we get a low-scoring battle here. I have it UConn 71 to Villanova's 65.
Yeah, I like UConn here at home as well. I think, they haven't played super well as of late, like we've talked about, but they do have, they've had a full week of prep coming off a kind of uneven win against Georgetown last Saturday. So I am going to take UConn to win this one. I think they maybe score a little bit more. I'm going to put them in the low 70s. I'm going to say they win 73-66. Anything else to add before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple teams that I need to see like prove a little bit more. I mean, I think UConn's being crowned as like, I mean, they're obviously a title contender. I don't think anyone's like disputing that, but I think everyone's kind of viewing them as a top 3 team in the country right now, and I'm not 100% sure that they're playing that way, particularly on the offensive end. Like they do have some flaws when it comes to having that championship ceiling, and even like with Villanova as well, like we mentioned, like the defense is sliding a little bit, and like I guess just the ceiling on both ends of the floor has been a little bit lacking. So I think two teams that need to prove a lot. These are probably both of these teams are top 3 teams in the league. I know Villanova was contending for that number 2 spot before, St. John's like didn't have their way with them at Wells Fargo, but they definitely controlled that game from start to finish. So Villanova definitely, needs a good showing here.
Yeah, no, it'd be a big win for Villanova, I would imagine, heading into the rest of conference play. But we'll find out what happens on Saturday afternoon. That wraps things up for us here. Thank you for listening to the Manly Hoops podcast.